Can I just get one or two suggestions as far as your answer to number 4 goes?
We talked about the top tier of coach, illustrating it. So, you know, the All Blacks sort of fairs, big sticks, those sort of coaches being brave enough to demonstrate that, which then I guess paves the way for other coaches to follow. Sometimes at that level it's so cutthroat you don't tend to see a lot of that.
Yep.
But when you do, like the Wayne Smiths type people, it kind of empowers coaches coming through to have the same philosophy, and it sort of engenders the public appreciation of, okay, well it didn't work, but it looked good, and nobody leaves the field or the court wondering what might have been. So
yep.
maybe just those.
So is it courage or is it expectation? Are coaches at that level expected to be creative?
I think you are. I think you're encouraged to have a lot of, quivers in your bow or arrows in your, tools in your kit. You know, you're expected, you front up here, you better walk the walk and talk the talk and be able to have a lot of options available to your players.
Yep.
But I don't think the Kiwi public is very accepting of creativity that doesn't work. Like, if it works, fantastic, but you still will have people go, I can't believe they tried that.
Yeah.
It paid off. You know, still
like rotating players.
Yeah, that was one of the
And I think even like with women's rugby, there's a certain way of playing rugby in New Zealand, which is like the standard and expected, and all the regional coaches and that play that particular style, and there's like 2 key defensive patterns that everyone does. And so it'd be ballsy to create a new defensive pattern for 7 that would be played in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And at a women's level, not at I have no idea.
Its effectiveness would come down to creativity. It would come down to all the things that we've discussed all day, relative to the processes and the ability for the coach to get the players to believe in it and buy into it.
Yeah, and I'd say in New Zealand with the women's players, when you do introduce new things, they would be reluctant at the start until they could see it working and you
yep.
could buy into it.
Okay.
At this national tournament that I was at in the holidays, the winning team was coached by a man, and he was very unorthodox, and there were so many netball traditionalists who just panned him all week. You know,
yep.
he left the court at a quarter break to go to the toilet in the middle of the final. You know, like.
When you've got to go, you've got to go.
I'm not saying it's a typical man behaviour, but it's not a typical netball behaviour. And then in the middle of the prize giving, he does the same thing. He walks over there to chat to some, you know, like, just, he won the thing.
Yeah.
You know, the players obviously responded to him, but it wasn't an accepted. I'm not saying that's creativity necessarily, but it's different.
It's definitely unorthodox.
It's unorthodox.
Yeah.
People didn't like it. It's not the way, and it's a women's game coached by a man. You know, like, it's just.
But an element of creativity is the players having the ability to read what's happening in front of them.
Yep.
Reacting accordingly.
Absolutely, yeah. So some of you will have come across Chiksek Mihai, Mahaley Chiksek Mihai, who's one of the most regarded almost philosophical psychologists in the States, and he's the person that we attribute the theory of flow to, which I'm sure you've probably come across. People talk about flow, and I like the way he's defined creativity. So what that coach was possibly doing was actually creating a new domain in terms of, you know, the behaviour of a netball coach. Then again, he may not. He might have just had a prostrate problem. So what does this mean when we start to throw in terms like domains, etc.? So the idea here is that we talk about these systems that are put in place as far as, you know, when we're talking about creativity is concerned. So the first is, yes, the domain is a symbolic set of rules and procedures So obviously they relate to your sport, right? You do things in a certain way in netball or in trap shooting or in golf or whatever, right? There are certain things that happen, and they tend to be symbolic, but a lot of the time obviously they're codified as well, aren't they? So in track and field, you know, there are certain rules that you must abide by, otherwise you ain't got a dog show. So that is the domain. It's about what the sport is set around. It's its codified version, if you like. All right. And then within that domain, we have a field, and that tends to be our administrators and our coaches, etc. So, Crystal, the thing you were talking about before, as far as, you know, the coaches of women's sevens or rugby are expected, for instance, to behave in a certain way or to do things in a certain way.
No, they would be looked at as creative if they were to do it.
Gotcha.
Which is required.
Okay.
But
Yeah. And obviously, you know, in some ways, you can't get by without basically buying into the field or subscribing to the field. It's very difficult for you to do what it is that you want to do in that situation because you haven't basically joined the club or the culture of the sport or whatever. And sometimes that can be to your demise as a coach. All right? You're just not taken on board. But what we want to see, and what the idea of the creativity is, that that person or individual, that coach, actually uses what's there available to them as far as the system is concerned, and almost bypasses the field to actually create some sort of new way of doing things, some new way of seeing things. So the other individuals and the gatekeepers, so to speak, that, you know, tend to control the sport or your activity or what it's all about, suddenly find that there's some new upstart on the stage who's doing things differently. And most of us like to do things differently. Right? Most of us like to have a bit of creativity in our lives, I would imagine. What, for instance, chose you, or what led to your decision to come here this morning as far as the route that you took? Quickest. See, because the gatekeepers would tell us that if you want to get somewhere, you should take the quickest route, shouldn't you? That's the way that you do it. It's not because, oh, I might just drive by so-and-so because that rhododendron will be in bloom by now, and I'd really like to see what it looks like. All right? You don't do it that way, even though it's probably a far more creative option. And it's likewise when you go to work every day. Is it just time that you base your decision to do that? And is it, for instance, in a coaching environment, what you do at your practices and how you even structure your practices? Well, Raz heard me go on about these coaches that have warm-ups, you know. They don't actually ever increase the core temperature of their players, so why do we call it a bloody warm-up? Why do we spend, you know, a quarter of our time putting our runners and our hitters or whoever through a warm-up when we don't actually physiologically warm them up? Why do we call it that? And why do we have to have a separate, discrete thing called a warm-up, which is basically doing things that are possibly totally unrelated to what it is that we're hoping to do in that session? There's no alignment whatsoever. If there's something that we're really wanting to do in our practice or in our session, then why can't the way we do that be part of the warm-up? We don't have to necessarily do other things that are totally foreign to what today's session is all about. But the field says we need to have a warm-up. And so we decide that we will subscribe to the field because that's what everybody else does. And we must be homogenous. We must be compliant. Even though we know that there is probably a lot of other ways that we could do things. So when we go back to this whole idea of sitting down and planning and even running our practices or running our games, dare we be different? Can we actually do things different? The most exciting thing I ever did when I was coaching basketball was I sat on the bench for the whole game and I let my players go. I just said, right, it's your call. Told the captain that he was going to make the substitutions, and away we went. And I was depressed at the end of it because we had a very good victory. And I felt redundant. And not only that, I had to go home and put some Leonard Cohen music on. It was just, I was so depressed. And then I suddenly thought, well, maybe this is a good thing. So it caused me to actually change the way I did things as far as my team and my practice was concerned. I could only do it because that year I had the players that I could put the faith into making the calls, making those decisions. On other occasions it may not have worked. So, one of the things that underpins creativity is the notion of curiosity. What if? All right, so I heard Wayne Smith mentioned before, right? Wayne Smith amongst the coaching realm is known as the magpie, because Wayne Smith is incredibly good at going around talking to other coaches and picking up ideas like a magpie would do. And he is always curious about what other sports do, and that's what makes him such a connoisseur of coaching, if you like. Because invariably, he's got all sorts of ideas that he is prepared to try, to take on board. So, he is both interested and curious as to what is happening in other coaching worlds. And if you haven't read Lynn Kidman's book on making decision makers, I think it's called. Sorry? Developing decision makers, thank you. Which is a little bit hard to get hold of, but it's because it's done with an obscure publishing company that her husband runs. But
it's in the library that I've told you all about. People said, if you want to borrow it, I thought.
Yeah, it's a good book to look at because she's got a series of case studies in there, and part of the book focuses on Wayne Smith, who was one of her subjects in her research. And that's where you'll pick up about some of the things that he's done. So it's a case of looking outside our sport, looking outside our code, and you're getting in the heads of some of our colleagues, and obviously trying to develop that culture of sharing, like you've been doing here today, and hopefully will continue to do in the years to come. All right. So, can we actually get to that point of flow? All right, because we know that as our day goes through, we are in different levels of concentration. I mean, we're asking you to concentrate today for God knows how many hours, with a break here and there for food and the occasional video clip or whatever, but invariably we're asking you to keep focused for a considerable period of time. And good on you considering it's a Sunday. But we know that a lot of the time we want to try and get both ourselves as coaches but also obviously our players into that state of flow where the concentration just almost takes you to another place, into another world. Things just click. Things are just in sync. All right? So in rowing there's a classic term that Craig Lambert uses in his book which is called Lessons of Life from the Art of Rowing or something like that, and they talk about swing. So, rowers, particularly strokers, is that the term? Sweepers? Yeah, sweepers. I think that's the term that they use, swing. All right? When everything goes right, you just feel as if you're in this state of swing. And in lots of sports, you can probably think of lots of examples where that happens. So, obviously, drivers of Formula One motor racing, there's been some really interesting studies done on their basically psychological state where they almost get into that, it's another world. Everything else just becomes an absolute blur. And, runners talk about it when, you get on that high and everything else is oblivious. You just carry on focusing on that. And that's what we're looking for in that whole sort of coaching idea is you get to that point whereby